Ten years ago, President Kennedy, speaking for the most powerful nation in the world, said that America would pay any price, bear any burden, meet any hardship to assure the survival and the success of liberty. Now, in the 10 years since then, there's been something of a change of mood in the way in which the United States looks on her world role. President Nixon has made it quite clear that America could not and would not take upon herself now all the responsibility for the future of the free world. Now, of course, all great powers go through different phases, different psychological phases when they're at their peak. It was so with our own British Empire. A certain brashness gives place to confidence, and confidence gives place to self-doubt, disenchantment even. Perhaps you could even call it maturity. The world confidence that America felt during the 1960s was typified by her involvement in Vietnam. In London for a meeting of the Southeast Asia Treaty Organization, and on his way to do what he can for the cause of peace in the Middle East, is the American Secretary of State, William Rogers. Mr. Rogers, would you agree that the United States views her world role rather subtly differently now from 10 years ago?
Yes, Mr. Key. I think we do view our world role differently than we did then. But I don't think our foreign policy has changed in any radical sense. We still have commitments around the world which are important, we believe, to the stability of the world and contribute to the peace in the world, and we plan to live up to those commitments.
Can I ask you then, in what subtleties does this difference consist?
Well, I think there was a tendency on the part of the United States and its leaders to think that we could solve the problems that existed in the world, and that we could undertake to provide security for nations that had problems of security. Since then, we realized that there is a limitation to what we can do. There is a limitation in a budgetary sense. There's a limitation in the sense that we're quite convinced that we cannot make the world in our image. I think some people felt that we might be able to. Consequently, we are reducing our presence consistent with our obligations throughout the world.
Now, I imagine it's your experience in Vietnam that has led you to take this new look, most specifically.
Well, I think certainly that has had a great part to play in that decision, although we also have budgetary problems. We have a deficit in our budget. We are carrying in many parts of the world a greater share of the burden than we should, and I think other nations are beginning to recognize that.
Well, does this then mean that you now think that the United States was perhaps a little too overconfident in thinking it could protect South Vietnam from communism quite as categorically as it then thought, and that your budgetary and other problems that you now have mean that you can't back it up quite so much?
Well, I hesitate to comment about the past in that sense. I don't want to pass judgment on any previous administration. I think the general thrust of your question is correct, that we do recognize that there are certain limitations to what we can do. And I think that the Nixon doctrine, the doctrine that the President announced in Guam, is a very sound doctrine. That is that other nations, particularly Asian nations, have to help themselves, and they have to work together to assist each other, and that we'll play a role in that, but that we won't take over the primary responsibility of their security.
But then wasn't the problem that you couldn't get them to play that role unless you engaged yourself as heavily as you did have to, apparently, in Vietnam?
Well, I think that's an argument that can be made, and that is, I think, the way many of us feel. But the point is now that unless we let the Asians themselves play that role, we'll never know. And the President's program of withdrawal from Southeast Asia is the only program that will work, because until they're faced with the responsibility, it's natural for them not to accept it.
What you see I'm obviously getting at is this, that by disengaging, as you're now doing, partly in response to political pressure at home, you are really prejudicing the whole objective for which so many millions of human beings have suffered.
No, not at all, and that's exactly why President Nixon is pursuing the policy of withdrawal in its present form. And that is, we are withdrawing in an orderly way, in a way that will not destabilize the area, in a way that will permit South Vietnam to protect itself and for Cambodia and Laos to protect themselves without permitting a communist takeover. And we think that that's going to work.
You're really confident that South Vietnam will be either able to stand up militarily, or that she will not, if she does succeed in getting a military standstill, she will not have to take in communists into the political setup in South Vietnam?
Well, when you say take in communists in the political settlement, we have no objection if there's an election to abiding by the results. What we do say is that the people of South Vietnam should have the right to determine their own future, and by the elective process, we know of no other way to determine what people want. Now, in terms of the of Vietnamization, that's the first part of your question. Do we think it'll work? The answer is yes, we think it will work. The South Vietnamese now have over 1 million men, well-trained, well-armed, good morale. They've been fighting very well. They're beginning to develop a feeling of nationalism and pride, and they are stronger than the North Vietnamese, certainly in terms of manpower and equipment. So we know of no reason why they can't take care of their own security problems. In fact, every major offensive this year in Vietnam has been conducted by the South Vietnamese.
But didn't the Laos offensive make you think again about this?
Well, it made us realize, and it made the South Vietnam realize that there's a problem there, but they did quite well. Let me say this, General Abrams has told us, and I have great respect for his judgment, that some of the units in South Vietnam fought exceptionally well, and their morale is good. They're very proud of the fact that they were able to invade a territory that had been controlled by the enemy for many years, 5 or 6 years, and do it reasonably successfully.
Do you still basically see Communist China as a threat in Southeast Asia?
Well, the Communist China hasn't changed its basic policy at all. We have not thought that they would actually send ground forces into Laos or South Vietnam, and so far our judgment is correct. But their policy is the same. They obviously would like to have greater influence in that area. They're expansionist in many ways. So we don't think their policy has changed, but we are very encouraged, of course, by the recent overtures to the outside world.
Well, Chairman Mao has in fact issued, we understand, an invitation to President Nixon to visit him in Peking. Now, would you yourself advise that he should respond to that invitation?
Well, I think that the invitation of the chairman was fairly casually made. I don't believe it was a serious invitation in that sense. President Nixon has said that he would hope someday that he could visit Communist China. I think if great progress is made, if the Chinese Communists decide to join the world and become less isolated and comply with the rules of international law and so forth, then down the road a piece it might well be possible. Certainly I don't think now it would be practical.
Well, there certainly are signs that something is happening from China's side. You yourself have welcomed the ping-pong gesture. What do you think you can do, actually, to expand this possibility of rapprochement?
Well, I think first that we have to recognize that the step that has been taken is a small step, but it's a significant step. Obviously, they didn't make this decision without considerable thought. Now, what we propose to do is to take steps on our part. President Nixon took 2 or 3 steps prior to the decision by the Chinese Communists to invite the ping-pong players to visit. And there was no response for quite a while, for a year or so. Now, after the decision by the Chinese Communists to invite ping-pong players and newsmen to Communist China, President Nixon announced that we would liberalize our trade restrictions so that we could have greater trade with Communist China. He provided an easy way for visitors to go to Communist China and vice versa. He liberalized our currency restrictions so it would be easier for the Chinese Communists to get American money to spend when they came to our country and so forth.
But what about, may I ask you about the thorny problem of Chiang Kai-shek and Taiwan? Formosa?
Well, we don't think it presents a problem now. In other words, we think that we favor very much exchange of newspaper people and students and doctors and intellectuals and so forth, in fact anybody else for that matter. And we would hope that the Chinese communists would visit the United States. And we also would hope for more trade. Now, we don't think those things are inconsistent with the support that we give to the Republic of China. We're going to continue our obligation. We have treaty obligations with the Republic of China. We intend to live up to those obligations. So we don't think that they're inconsistent.
But aren't such overtures a bit inconsistent with a reluctance to see Communist China in the UN?
Well, I think the UN is a separate problem, and the representation problem in the UN is a complex problem. But I don't see that as the major problem. The major problem has been that Communist China has had no interest at all in becoming part of the international community. They've been totally isolated. They've been rather paranoid in their attitude toward the rest of the world. They haven't gotten along with the Soviet Union. They haven't gotten along with Japan. They haven't gotten along with India. They certainly haven't gotten along with the United States. In fact, the only countries that they're particularly friendly with are Albania and a couple of others. Now, if they decide that they want to have more normal relations with the rest of the world, it's all to the good. We favor it very much. Why not?
But now, isn't this decision to have more normal relations really part of their maneuvering against Soviet Russia?
Well, we don't know. We don't know. But in any event, it doesn't make much difference to us. Well, that's not the reason that we favor it. We favor it because we think that a free society like ours, like yours and mine, other free societies, have a great advantage in the world when we're dealing with closed societies. And we think when closed societies start to open their door a little bit, it's a good thing for the world.
Yes, but don't our free societies have a very delicate tactical problem before them now, inasmuch as two societies, neither of which we like or feel is in any way sympathetic to ours, are loggerheads with each other. Now, what should our role be? What is the United States' role in this? Is it to encourage the friction between China and Russia? Or should it be to stand aside totally, or what?
Well, we are interested bystanders, and we would hope that we could get along better with both the Soviet Union and Communist China, and that is our policy. We're pursuing a policy of attempting to have improved relations with the Soviet Union and to have better relations with Communist China. Now, the fact that they're having a feud doesn't, to us, seem to affect that policy. Why shouldn't we try to get along better with both the Soviet Union and Communist China? Now, if incidentally that irritates one or the other, that just happens to be a dividend, but it's not our policy.
How far does the United States today see Russia as a threat to the sort of society we like and want to preserve?
Well, I don't like to use the word threat in the sense of any imminent problem. We think that the Soviet Union's policy is the same as it has been for many years. They want to expand their influence in the world. They believe that the socialist system, the communist system, is the system that should prevail. And they are going to do what they can to expand that influence. We do not think that they are out to cause another world war, because we both have sufficient nuclear strength to be able to destroy the other if a nuclear war started. So we don't believe that the Soviet Union has that in mind. But the Soviet Union is going to take advantage of every opportunity to extend their influence.
But do you feel that the Soviet Union is trying to attain such superiority in military strength to you that that balance would be disturbed?
Well, I think yes. I think if they could, they would like to do that. But I think they know that they can't do it. Their gross national product is about half of our gross national product. They know that we have ability now to watch what they're doing. The systems of inspection are so adequate that we know what they're doing, so that we don't believe there's any possibility of their getting in that position.
Now, of course, as we all know, you're about to go off to the Middle East to visit all the countries concerned in the crisis there, and you are, I think, the first Secretary of State to visit the Middle East for about 18 years.
That's right.
I understand that your first move, your first limited move, will be to try and get the Suez Canal opened. But aren't you thereby, in fact, helping the Russians strategically quite a bit, because won't their forces be able to move out into the Indian Ocean, where we're a bit worried about them?
Well, our first objective, Mr. Key, is to do anything that we can, to do all we can, to help bring about a peace agreement, a final peace agreement.
Between Israel and Egypt?
Between Israel, Egypt, and Jordan. Pursuant to the Security Council resolution, which was passed in 1967. Now, Ambassador Yaring has been the person who's been attempting, under the auspices of the United Nations, to bring that about, and we've been giving him full support in that effort. At the moment, there is an impasse in those negotiations.
And you are going out to try and break through it?
Well, we've been working at this for some time, attempting to do something to break the impasse. And we have one goal, and that is to do everything we can to bring about a final peace agreement, because we think the climate has never been better. Now, the Suez Canal proposal, which has been referred to by President Sadat, which was referred to by Prime Minister Meir and others, is a proposal of an interim nature. And if it could be accomplished, it would provide additional time for Ambassador Yaring to try to work out the details of a final settlement. So we would favor the opening of the Suez. In answer to your question about would it be of advantage to the Soviet Union, my best judgment is, on balance, no. On balance, we think the opening of the Suez would benefit everyone. Certainly it would provide additional stability in the area for a period of time. It would prove, I think, to the parties that it was possible to live together in peace, and the atmosphere would be improved. The climate for the negotiations of Ambassador Yaring would be helped.
Can we now turn to some of the really hard difficulties that are in the way of bringing these negotiations for peace to a successful conclusion? You mentioned the United Nations resolution of November 1967. That resolution, of course, calls for two major things. One, the recognition of sovereignty by Egypt of Israel, a mutual recognition of sovereignty, and the other, if I may quote the words, withdrawal of Israeli armed forces from territories occupied in the recent conflict. Can I ask you, how does the United States interpret that? Does that mean withdrawal from all the territories that Israel occupied?
No, Mr. Key, there's an additional provision here in the next paragraph which refers to secure and recognize boundaries. So we interpret the Security Council resolution to mean that the withdrawal should be to secure and recognize boundaries. There's also a provision in this resolution which says that there should be the principle of non-acquisition of territory.
Exactly.
Should be lived up to. So our view in the United States, as expressed by President Nixon in his recent State of the World message, and as I've expressed several times, is that there should be withdrawal to secure borders. But those borders should only be drawn in a way that will provide security. In other words, not in a way that would justify acquisition of territory in any substantial way.
So that this does not mean, in fact, total Israeli withdrawal from all the territories occupied.
Well, as I say, it means withdrawal to secure and secure borders. Now, the secure borders, we think, should be negotiated between the parties.
Would you say that, for instance, Jerusalem was necessary to the security of Israel's borders?
Well, I think Jerusalem presents a different problem, not a problem of security. It's a very complex problem that refers to many religious factors.
Exactly, but you have a clash between the two there, haven't you? I mean, the Israelis...
At the moment, Mr. Key, though, we're talking principally about the problems between Egypt and Israel.
But do you think...
Eventually, we'll have to get to the problems between Jordan and Israel, problems of Jerusalem, problems of refugees. But at the moment, the impasse has to do with Israel and Egypt. And we would hope that some method could be arrived at to break that impasse.
Surely Egypt could hardly stand aside and see Israel continue to occupy Jerusalem. I mean, the Arab consciousness is always going to be an obstacle to that, isn't it?
Yes, we've made clear in our position that there has to be a solution to the problem of Jerusalem that takes into account these very deep religious convictions of the parties. I mean, but as I say, I want, for the moment, because we're doing this step by step, in my discussions in the Middle East, to deal principally with with the immediate impasse, which is the problems, which concern the problems between Israel and Egypt.
But someday, and perhaps quite soon, you'll have to get to these more difficult realities, won't you? And there does seem to me to remain this permanent deadlock between Israel and Egypt, inasmuch as Egypt wants total withdrawal from all the territories occupied, and Israel has made quite clear that she has no intention of withdrawing. Now, in the last resort, if the United States thought it correct, would it bring pressure on Israel, and could it bring pressure on Israel to withdraw?
Well, there again, I want to be sure that we don't misunderstand each other. There, on the question of all, or almost all, so forth, that really gets down to drawing the lines.
But anyway,
we think this. We think that if this process continues step by step, that it's possible to work out a peaceful settlement. A year ago, the parties did not think it was possible to have a ceasefire. There's been a ceasefire in effect now for 9 months. Parties didn't think that Egypt would ever agree to that Israel had the right to be sovereign. There was considerable doubt that Egypt would ever agree to enter into a written agreement with Israel. There was doubt that Egypt would agree to free navigation in both the Straits of Tiran, the Gulf of Aqaba, and the Suez Canal, and they've indicated they'd be willing to do that. There was doubt that Israel would ever agree to withdrawal at all. If they use any word withdrawal, Israel suggests we're willing to withdraw. So we've made a good deal of progress. Of course there are a lot of hurdles ahead of us, but if we take them one at a time, as we're trying to do, I still think there's a hope for peace. Slight as it may be, I think there's a hope. And I think the more that people say to themselves, well, maybe it can work out. Let's have a little optimism, then the better the prospects are.
But you do think it as one of the possibilities for the future that Israel might eventually be brought to agree to withdrawal from almost all?
No, I don't want to say anything about what I think Israel might do or what I think Egypt might do. That's for the parties to decide. I think there's a prospect of a peace agreement in the area. The climate has never been better. People now are accustomed to peace. Tourism is booming in the area. There's been no fighting for about 9 months. King Hussein has Jordan under control. The Fedayeen movement is not as strong as it was.
The Palestinians are still there, though, aren't they?
Yes, but that's the reason why we're very anxious to keep the momentum going, because if it dies down, then the Fedayeen movement could revive. What we're trying to do is keep the momentum going. Let's move ahead, and I think there's a possibility that this could happen. Now, it's not going to happen during my trip. It's going to take some time. The purpose of my trip is to see if we can't exchange ideas with the parties, see if we can't move them a little bit closer together, not in terms of pieces of paper and all of that, in terms of talking over the problems. And there is, for example, there is an agreement now that the Suez Canal should be open. And we think it would be to everyone's advantage, so that Egypt would like to open it, Israel would like to have it open, the United States favors it, the Soviet Union does, and all the nations in the area.
May I ask you this general question then? Does the United States accept the full implications of the Zionist doctrine that all Jews in the world have a right to settle in that part of the Middle East?
Well, we don't ask ourselves that question.
But might you not have to if the Jews come out of Russia, for instance?
I don't think so.
It is, of course, the question, you see, that the Arabs are always asking themselves. That's why they're so worried at what they call Israeli expansion.
Yes, but if, you see, the Arabs have asked, and we understand, they have asked for guarantees of their borders. And Israel is very concerned about guarantees for its borders. Now, Egypt has accepted the proposition, if it gets the conditions, if the conditions that they've laid down are satisfied, it has agreed that Israel has a right of sovereignty, has a right to exist as a nation in the future, and is willing to make an agreement in writing to that effect, that it will not interfere with the internal affairs of Israel. Now, that's a big step forward.
But still, if the large number of Jews who are present in Russia and agitating to be let out, if they were let out, it would very severely aggravate the whole problem in the Middle East, wouldn't it?
Well, I'm not sure how many persons that Israel could accommodate in their present territory, but they say that they can accommodate a great deal more. I don't believe that's a problem for the immediate future.
But you see, that's exactly the Arab problem, because you said in their immediate territory, and the Arab fear seems to be that the Israelis might need more territory.
Yes, but if the agreement provides guarantees against that from the Arab standpoint, and if Israel is guaranteed that satisfactorily that their territory, present territory of Israel, is not going to be invaded, then you'd have stability in the area.
Can I ask you very briefly, you've said that you think the Third World War could be triggered off in the Middle East. Now, if this present expedition of yours proves not to be successful, do you think it brings a Third World War closer?
Oh, no. I didn't say anything about a Third World War in that context. I was saying that the seeds could be planted. But I was thinking many years ahead. I don't believe the Third World War is something we should be talking about now. I don't myself believe that the Soviet Union wants to have a confrontation with the United States in that area of the world, and certainly the United States has no interest in having a confrontation with the Soviet Union.
Mr. Rogers, thank you very much.
Thank you.